Hey guys, what up? Tony here. My heart, my vision, and my passion is to take God's message of purity to the world. The Power of Purity is a 501c3 nonprofit, and like any other ministry, the reach and impact of what we're able to accomplish through the power of purity is predicated upon the finances that we have available. In view of this, we need help. And it's only because of faithful ministry partners like you that the Power of Purity is touching lives literally all around the world. Would you consider making a donation or becoming a monthly partner with this ministry so we can continue to unleash massive amounts of destruction upon the kingdom of darkness? Every dollar you give is tax deductible, and every dollar will be used to advance the healing message of purity to a world that desperately needs it. If you've been touched and encouraged by the Power of Purity, and if you believe in the message of this ministry, would you prayerfully consider becoming a monthly partner? If so, you can visit the Power of Purity website at www.powerofpurity.org, and at the top of the page is a donations link where you can become a vital part of this ministry's impact. Thank you so much for your love, your prayer, and your partnership. God bless you.
Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad you could be with me today. And if you've been tuned in for the past couple episodes, you know that I've been working my way through a session. It's actually session 26 from the Power of Purity video conference. And I think the content is really important, so I thought I'd share some of it with you guys here on the podcast. But it's entitled, Why You've Struggled So Much with Sex. And I know that for many years in my own heart and life, I became a Christian when I was 16 years old. But for many years, I didn't know what was wrong with me because I couldn't control sex. It seemed like whenever sexual temptation would present itself to me, I was virtually powerless to resist against it. And I would act out, often in violation of my very own conscience. I didn't want to do what I was about to do. I knew that I shouldn't do it. I knew that God didn't want me to do it. I knew that I was going to feel guilty and shameful after I did it and wish that I wouldn't have done it, and yet I would do it anyway. It's like sex had this power over me. It controlled me. It was a magistrate. It was a potentate. It was my master. And when you have a master, guess what? That means you're a slave. And a slave always obeys what his master tells him to do. And so I didn't know what was wrong with me. Why do I struggle so much with sex? Why do I struggle and struggle and struggle? And I seem incapable of managing this thing in a healthier way. And so the title of this session is Why You've Struggled So Much with Sex. And it's intended to help you understand yourself better than you've ever understood yourself before, and kind of the etymology of your struggle. What happens to the average American boy that causes him to have such a struggle with the issue of sex, especially those of us who become Christians, those of us who have a spiritual orientation in our life, and there's kind of this sense of duplicity between who I want to be spiritually, who I want to be in my relationship with God, and the reality of the struggle with my physical self or my fleshly self. The thesis of the session is this: when you understand the very unhealthy way your sexuality developed, you'll understand why you've struggled so much with sex. And if you're not caught up, you might want to go back and listen to the past 2 episodes. That'll catch you up. But I'm using this metaphor of the cake and the ingredients. The idea that the ingredients that you put into the cake predicate the quality of the cake that comes out of the oven. Put good ingredients in the cake, a good cake's going to come out. Put bad ingredients in a cake, then a bad cake's going to come out of the oven. And in the last episode, we took a look at just an average American boy, and we see the ingredients that are being placed into the sexual cake mix of his life at age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. The average American boy, what he's exposed to and what happens to him in this metaphor of the ingredients that are getting put into his sexual self. It's like this poor kid doesn't have a chance to become a healthy, holy, godly person in the way that he's experiencing and managing his sexual self. So no wonder so many of us have struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled. You know, I'm just right now in this moment thinking of a metaphor sometimes I see in pictures, but imagine this. If you had a young sapling of a tree, let's just say it's about as big as your thumb, and maybe, it's 2 or 3 feet tall, just a little baby tree. So you went out and you plant this tree in your yard, but you decide to do something, an experiment. So since it's so young and small and flexible, we might say it's impressionable, you decide to bend this tree. It's very flexible, so you bend it over, this exaggerated bend in the tree, and you tie it with a rope and a stake, and you stake it into that bent position. And you just leave it there, and you let that tree grow. And just imagine that you come back 10 years later. What shape do you think that tree is going to be? You see, in a short matter of time, you literally could come and cut that rope, and you would have embedded into that tree, that bend into the wood, the grain of the wood, and that tree will grow in that bent position as a result. And I guess it's just another metaphor to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make. In a way, a young boy is like that sapling. He's very flexible. He's impressionable, right? And the culture comes along, society comes along with all these impure, ungodly, unholy ingredients. It's like society bends the boy over and ties him down and puts this bend in him towards sexual impurity, promiscuity, you see, a fleshly sexual kind of orientation, and it influences who that young boy becomes. Well, I said that if you listen to this message, you're going to understand yourself better than you ever have before. That's my goal. And I was asking the question, let's look at this metaphorical boy, this average boy, that all these ingredients are getting put into the cake. And there's one issue that's very significant, and that is a boy becomes a man. He's going through this transition. So what's being embedded into him, you see, in this transition of puberty, is going to live in him as he becomes a man. He transitions from boyhood into manhood. In the metaphor of the cake that comes out of the oven is predicated upon the ingredients that get put into the cake before it goes into the oven. So, in other words, the ingredients that are being embedded in this boy at a young age, as he comes out of the oven of boyhood, he's becoming a man now, you see. But these things have been baked into him in this metaphor, these ingredients that were put into him. And so I'm suggesting a series of 10 steps that the average boy goes through, 10 things that happen to the average boy that help us understand kind of this process and what it looks like. And so I'm going to start into that at this point. And the first step is this: the discovery of masturbation, orgasm, and ejaculation. Every boy eventually and inevitably discovers his penis, right? Studies show, in fact, that some boys actually begin to masturbate in the womb before they're born They have video and such of little boys that will actually instinctively learn to rub themselves there, to touch themselves. And I can only imagine it creates a sense of pleasure, a pleasurable sensation. So a child that young can learn to do that. I think I may have shared in an earlier episode, I don't know for sure, but I love this story, so I'm going to go ahead and take the liberty of sharing it again. And if you've heard it already, please forgive me, but I love the story. I call it Jacob and the Dinger. We were going to church with some people. This is some years ago, and this was a young family, and they had a couple small kids. The little boy's name was Jacob, and I think he was 5 years old. And the way this family's situation was, the mother had to get up really early and go to work. The dad went to work a little later in the morning. So the duty fell on the father to get the kids up every morning, feed them breakfast, get them dressed, and drop them off at the babysitter so then he could go to work. So the dad is in charge of this. And this one particular morning, Jacob is sitting over in the corner of the family room, almost like in a timeout, like he got in trouble. He's kind of in the corner, facing the corner, and he's preoccupied. The dad, I guess, doesn't know, is he reading a book? Is he playing with a toy? And so dad says, Jacob, come on, we got to get going. We're going to be late. And, as you can only imagine, it's hectic. The dad is frazzled. He's trying to get the kids dressed, get breakfast cleaned up, get ready to leave, get the kids in the car. And 5 minutes later, he looks over, and Jacob is still sitting there. And the dad says again, Jacob, come on. Now, there's one other little fact that I need to tell you, fill you in on the story. In this particular family, they referred to Jacob's little penis as a dinger. You know how different families will give, kind of affectionately give a name to genitals, the little girl's vagina or the little boy's penis. So they referred to this as the dinger. So a few more minutes goes, and Jacob is not moving, and the dad's really getting frustrated. He says, Jacob, come on, we got to get going. And with that, Jacob stands up, and he turns around, and he puts his hands, his fists on his hips, kind of like Superman, and he sticks his chest out. He's standing there like Superman, and sure enough, sticking out of his pants, Jacob has a little boner, a little erection. And apparently that's what he's been playing with over in the corner. And Jacob then says to his father, what do you think of that dinger, Dad? I love that story. You see, Jacob had discovered his dinger. Jacob discovered this part of his body, and every boy inevitably is going to discover his penis in a new and a different way, and he's going to discover masturbation, orgasm, and ejaculation. The average boy begins puberty between the ages of 10 and 12 years old, and the process typically takes 2 to 5 years. Some boys start puberty a little earlier, some a little later. The process might be a little slower for some boys and a little faster for others. But it's at this point of puberty that a boy is literally physically changing from a boy to a man and becoming physically capable of reproduction. Hormones are beginning to flow through his body, right? His body's beginning to change. He's changing from a boy to a man. He's beginning to have thoughts and feelings that he's never had before, that are essentially sexual in nature. And about this time, the boy will inevitably discover his penis in a new and different way. He's going to discover this. He's going to be interested in this. He's going to figure out, holy cow, there's something about this that feels really, really good. Now, up until this point, a boy typically maybe has touched himself or fondled his penis and derived pleasurable sensations from doing so. maybe that's what's motivating even the baby in the womb. You see, he's deriving these pleasurable sensations. But this new experience that he discovers when he discovers masturbation and orgasm and ejaculation, it opens up an entire new world to him. He discovers that he has the ability to create this most unbelievable, euphoric, intense, pleasurable sensation like nothing he's ever experienced before. He's discovered masturbation, orgasm, and ejaculation. And that brings us to step 2, which I'm calling repetition. And it's a short step, but it's essentially the concept that step 2 follows the first step very quickly for most of us, and the boy soon discovers that this unbelievably intense, euphoric, pleasurable discovery, this sensation that he's figured out, that he has the ability to create and replicate this experience over and over and over and over and over again, as many times as he wants to. This ability and the corresponding activity of masturbation, therefore, soon establishes itself in a kind of repetition, right? The boy begins to seek and then replicate this newfound experience over and over and over again. And that then leads us to step 3, which I'm calling habit. And a habit, by the way, is defined as a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that's hard to give up. So as the boy continues in this repetition of this experience that he's discovered, first he's repeating it, but in a very short matter of time, it literally is becoming a habit. It's becoming a settled or regular tendency or practice in this boy's life. And that leads to step number 4, which I call sexual rhythm. Sexual rhythm concerns the regularity at which a person seeks and experiences an orgasm. You see, through the established habit of masturbation, the boy is beginning to establish, albeit unconsciously so, a kind of sexual rhythm in his life, a kind of relationship with his body, if you will, a relationship with his penis, and actually a relationship with his own orgasm, and he establishes a kind of sexual rhythm. And he gets used to having this experience every so often. And for most of us, it was more often than not, right? Most of us tend to err, or many of us do anyway, erred on the side of excess, you see. And so this kind of excessive sexual rhythm is becoming established in a young boy's life at a very early age. And this then leads to step 5, which I call sexual appetite. And it's through the influence of this sexual rhythm, you see, that a boy's body begins to gain authority over him at this point, as a kind of sexual appetite's established within his body, and the boy is learning to serve the sexual appetite in the same way that he serves other needs and appetites of his physical body. I remember talking to a pretty young guy one time, and we were talking about some of the issues that he was struggling with in his life, and we were talking about the issue of masturbation, and he told me that it was his habit to masturbate at least 10 times every day, and that sometimes he would do even more than that. And that's common, right, for a lot of young guys. Can you see the concept of sexual appetite? That this appetite, you see, is becoming rather excessive. First is the discovery. Then he learns, wow, I can repeat this repetition. And through repetition, it becomes a habit. And through habit, a kind of sexual rhythm is being established in his life. And as the rhythm is embedded, now a sexual appetite. He's actually gaining an appetite and longing for this. He wants to do this. Every person lives in their own body, right? And without consciously realizing it, every person, I would advocate, actually learns the language of their body. And we learn to cooperate with the signals and the messages that our body is almost continuously speaking to us. For example, how do you know when you're hungry? You know because you know your own body, and you know the language of your body, and you know what your body's telling you, and you know what your body wants and what your body needs. And you know that your body's telling you, hey, I'm hungry. Feed me. Give me a hamburger. How do you know when you're tired? You know because you know your body. You live in your skin. You see, you know the language of your own body. Your body talks to you, in other words. Your body tells you what it wants. Your body tells you, hey, I'm tired. Let's go to bed. How do you know when you're thirsty? How do you know when you have to go to the bathroom? How do you know when to stop eating at the end of a meal? How do you know that you're full? We know all these things because we know our own body, because we live in our body, and we know the language of our body, and we know what our body is telling us. We know what our body wants, what our body needs, and we know when our body's telling us, we're thirsty, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I have to go to the bathroom. Hey, I'm full, stop eating. And in the same way, you guys, I would advocate that the sexual appetite becomes one of the strongest appetites of the human body. And in the same way, a boy learns the language of his body concerning all these other appetites, you see, the language of his body, he's learning the sexual appetite of his body. And he's learning to concede to this appetite, the sexual appetite, through the practice of repetition that becomes a habit, and then a sexual rhythm is established in his relationship with his body. So now it's not uncommon that his sexual appetite is continuing to grow and grow. And in the same way, his body tells him when it's physically hungry, hey, feed me. A boy's body begins to tell him when it's sexually hungry, hey, I want an orgasm. He feels that tension in his body. He feels that need to want to feel that feeling, to have that release. And so his sexual appetite becomes established in his physical body, and he knows the language of his body, and therefore he begins to serve this sexual appetite in the same way he serves his physical appetite. When he's hungry, what's a kid going to do? What's a teenager's going to eat, right? Hey, I'm hungry. I'm going to give my body what it wants. And so, through the influence of all these bad ingredients that have been put in the cake, the influence of the rope that's bent the tree over, you see there's this growing escalation, this powerful sexual feeling inside of him. This sexual appetite's being established, and so he learns to feed his sexual appetite, and that leads to step number 6, which I call fantasy. This is the next component that gains power. It comes to life, and it's part of this equation of where all this is leading in this average boy's heart and life. So here's a question, guys. What's the biggest and the most powerful sex organ for most men in their body? And the answer is the brain. And a good example of this is masturbation, okay? For most men, masturbation is not a benign or mindless event, right? Or said another way, a person's mind has to go somewhere during the act of masturbation. A person has to think about something. They have to visualize a scene, a scenario, an event, a situation. And so there's almost always a movie playing, you see, on the big screen in the theater of a person's mind. It's the power of the mind that sets the stage and creates the atmosphere that makes arousal possible and eventual climax. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 and 28, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus is saying, basically, that this is a big issue here, okay? It's not just what's going on the outside of you that's important. In other words, are you literally, physically doing something? Going to a strip club? Are you having an affair with another person? That would be sexual sin, what you're doing on the outside. But Jesus is saying, hey, it's a big deal what's going on the inside of you when it comes to the issue of sex. And he's saying, hey, you've heard, don't commit adultery on the outside, but I'm telling you that if you're thinking of women with lust on the inside of you, in the eyes of God, you're already guilty of committing adultery. You see, so fantasy concerns what's going on the inside of a person, in their head, in their heart, in their imagination. Fantasy, by the way, is defined as the faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. Fantasy is the ability of a person to be anyone they want to be, to go anywhere they want to go, at any time they want, to do anything they want, with anyone they want, for any reason they want. You see, there's no limitations in fantasy. There's no consequences in fantasy. Anything you want to happen can happen in your fantasies. But there's a big, big danger in fantasy, guys. I would advocate it's not as innocent, it's not as benign as it may occur or seem at first. You think, oh, what's the big deal? If it's just my thoughts in my head, nobody knows about it, what's the big deal? But the danger is this. It's a spiritual reality that whatever's going on the inside of a person inevitably is eventually going to come out on the outside of that person. Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Matthew chapter 15 verse 19, Jesus said, "But what comes out of a man gets its start in the heart." It's from the heart that we vomit up our evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lies, and cussing. So you see, what lives on the inside of us defines who we are and almost inevitably is going to come out on the outside of us. So the issue here is this. At some point, as a man is progressing through these various stages that I'm trying to name, this kind of sexual escalation, he discovers his penis. He discovers masturbation, ejaculation, orgasm. And then repetition. He learns, I can repeat this over and over again. And through repetition, he establishes a habit in his life. And then because of this habit, a kind of sexual rhythm is established in his life. And this leads to the establishment of a sexual appetite that he's learning to serve and feed. You see, at some point, his mind inevitably is becoming more and more engaged in this process, more and more active. And now the power of sex involves not just what the man is doing on the outside, but even more so, it involves what's going on the inside of the man. I remember, I'm just thinking here in the moment, I was talking to a man very recently, and he was just telling me that how much he thinks about sex, that he just, and we all know this, right? I mean, I forget what the statistic is, but something amazing, like the average guy thinks about sex like, I don't know what it is, 5 times, 8 times every minute or something crazy. It's like, whatever it is, we know that it's excessive for most guys. we think about it, we think about it, we think about it. It's because it's been embedded in us, you see. So now my sexual self, my sexual issue isn't just about what I'm doing, but it's who I am. It's who I'm becoming. It's what lives in my mind. It's what lives in my heart, you see. And so through the power of fantasy, as that component is placed in a man's heart and life, it leads to step 7, which I'm calling compulsion. And I think what I'm going to do here, guys, I'm coming right up to the 30-minute mark. So what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I hope you're seeing this. I think for many guys, the content of this message might be kind of like a mirror. It's like we look into this and we see these steps, these components, these things that are embedded into a boy. And what does a mirror do? It reflects back an image of who you are. And so as God was helping me kind of put this together and understand this, it's what I mean when I say, holy cow, I started understanding myself better than I ever understood myself before. The title of this session is Why You've Struggled So Much with Sex. It's like, hello, duh. Yeah, of course we've struggled with sex. Look at what was embedded in us. Look at the ingredients that got put into our hearts and lives from a very early stage. Look at these steps that began to unfold in our life through discovery and repetition and habit and sexual rhythm and sexual appetite and fantasy and all these things. It's like, holy cow, this explains me. This helps me understand why I've struggled so much with sex. Well, guys, I'm really glad you could be with me today. I hope this podcast has been helpful and encouraging. I hope it's helping you understand yourself, and I hope it's helping you grow. And if it has been encouraging, would you tell a friend about it? Because there's a lot of guys out there that really need to be exposed to this and find some encouragement for their journey. So God bless you guys. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode. God bless.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.